Hi, I'm Ken Mingus. Welcome back to Mingus on Tech, where we talk about what's hot and what's not in technology. And what's perpetually hot in technology is the H-1B visa program. I've got Pat and Johanna here today to talk about that. Pat is our resident expert. He's been covering the H-1B visa topic for several years now. And most recently, he's been writing about how this has bubbled up in, of all places, this year's presidential campaign. So Pat, what's going on? We've got Donald Trump on one side sort of talking about visas and wanting to make some changes, and Hillary kind of being very quiet and scooping up a lot of Silicon Valley contributions. Is that what's...
Well,
have I got that right? Or
you have that right.
Okay.
You know, Hillary Clinton said something interesting about the H-1B visa the other day. In an interview, she said that when the Disney workers lost their jobs
in Florida, yep.
Right, when
Yep.
they had to train the replacements who were visa holders, she described it as heartbreaking.
Right.
Does that seem like an appropriate word?
It's disgusting. Heartbreaking is sad,
It's-
yes, but it also sounds like a word that doesn't have a solution, you know?
Exactly.
And that sums her up completely.
So she's
on
heartbroken.
this. Yeah, heartbroken. You know, when the asteroid hit the planet 65 million years ago, and
The
killed
dinosaurs
others,
were heartbroken,
that
too.
that was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But the dinosaurs weren't asked to train their mammal replacements. That would have been outrageous. You know? So, but she has no plan, and
Okay.
she's tone deaf on this issue.
All right.
Some people saw her remarks, her acknowledgement that this even happened, as the beginnings, the stirrings of an effort by her to pay attention to this issue. But one Disney worker who was laid off said this. He said that her impression was that they were collateral damage.
Yeah.
Now, Trump has latched onto this issue, and he has gotten some good advice, and he has put together a platform that is very mainstream. But Trump is a little flaky, and
Just a little, perhaps. Yeah. I think we get that.
And among the critics, it's kind of a yin and yang about him. They think that in the right combination with Congress, he could probably reform the H-1B.
Yeah.
But they also think he might go ahead and do things to the green card, which would turn it into kind of a new H-1B visa and negate all the effects of H-1B reform. So he's a bit of a paradox. He has no record on any of these issues. He doesn't seem terribly knowledgeable about it, but he is.
Why should H-1B be any different than anything else he's
Well-
talking about? No offense.
That's a whole different
Yeah,
thing.
I know. Different topic.
But that's in sum about where things stand with those two.
Okay. So what's interesting, too, is that there seem to be a couple of bills floating around Congress. You've got Representative Pascrell's bill he's a New Jersey Democrat, and Representative Issa's bill, Republican from California. They both want to make changes, but it seems like, as usual, there's no chance that any of these things it's certainly not going to happen this year. And so what are these bills doing? Why are they there? Are they just to call attention to it, or?
Well, Darrell Issa, Issa represents part of Southern California.
Is this for
Southern California Edison.
Okay.
Is. So he has that's a big issue out there, and his legislation is essentially seen as a placeholder, a way for him to tell his constituents that he's trying to do something on the issue.
So he's paying attention to local issues, basically. It's his way of saying, I've heard you. Southern Consolidated? No.
Southern California Edison.
And the issue there was the same sort of thing where they basically outsourced some of the jobs, and some of the IT workers had to train their replacements there, too?
Yes, approximately 500 IT workers were displaced, either laid off or cut, forced into retirement. And they trained H-1B. The company had hired two India-based offshore outsourcing firms, and these firms brought in a lot of visa workers, and the workers, the utility workers, had to train the replacements. And what's particularly interesting here, this was a utility. This is not an international company.
Right.
Their customer base is entirely in Southern California. They don't serve customers in India or Philippines or any place else in the globe. So this was a huge hit on middle class jobs by what had been a very stable employer, And I think that's what made Southern California Edison a particularly egregious.
That's the one that sort of bubbled up. Didn't it get some attention in the Senate? I mean, was that the,
Yes.
I know Disney did at some point, but
Yeah.
it seemed like the Southern California Edison issue, when it finally bubbled up, really caught the attention of some senators and some in the House, too, other than ISA.
Senator Jeff Sessions, who is head of the
And a Trump backer.
yes,
right?
he was the first senator to endorse Trump.
Right.
And he's held 3 hearings so far on high-tech worker displacements. One of his top staff members, Stephen Miller, interviewed people at Southern California Edison and Disney. Now, Miller is a high-ranking aide in the Trump organization.
Okay.
So Miller's role in the Trump organization, Sessions' endorsement of Trump, give people a lot of confidence that if Trump were elected, there would be H-1B reforms. But I'm painting a big asterisk next to that.
Well, the assumption being, if Trump were to be elected, that you would have to assume then that the Republicans probably held the Senate and the House, and so he would at least have Republicans to work with in Congress to make changes if he wanted to.
Well, this is a bipartisan issue, Ken.
Okay.
I mean, when Disney, after Disney, got all
Same
the
sort of
attention-
situation. Disney brought in some employees. They had to train their workers, and basically the local IT folks lost their jobs.
Senator Bill Nelson,
Democrat
Democrat,
from Florida.
right, went to Sessions
Yep.
and got his help to introduce a bill, legislation, to reform the H-1B visa.
There
So
are
now-
different approaches, though, right, with the reforms going on in different pockets of Congress, right? So maybe that's worth explaining a little bit in terms of what some of the different approaches are.
Yeah, there are nuances to how they to the proposals, but at their core, they try to accomplish 2 things. First, raise prevailing wages. In other words, make it more expensive to bring in H-1B visa workers, and secondly, put in a higher American first provision. Make it difficult to displace workers, to try to keep U.S. workers from being in a position where they have to train a foreign replacement.
Let me ask a dumb question. This seems like a no-brainer. I mean, why is it that there doesn't seem to be any kind of activity year in and year out? I mean, it is unusual that it's bubbled up even this year in the presidential campaign, and that's only largely because of Trump. That it, and of course some of the reporting that you've done on Southern California and Disney. But this seems like a no-brainer to me that if you've got foreign workers coming in on a particular program that Congress could change, and American workers are being displaced, you would think there'd be a hue and cry. And yet,
The lobbying is immense on this issue. The high-tech lobbying, the offshore outsourcing industry, which is the #1 use of these H-1B visas,
Right.
they just spend millions of dollars lobbying Congress to keep things the way they are, or even indeed raise.
haven't there been
quota.
efforts in the past to perhaps raise the cap even higher than the $65,000 a year that it is now? Didn't it even bubble up for a while during the recession, or at some point? Am I misremembering that at one point the cap was temporarily raised to like 120 or 130,000?
No, it was during the. It's been raised a couple
Okay,
times,
and it
then
comes back
It
down
comes
and-
back down.
okay.
3-year, but you're in the 115, 120. You're in the ballpark
Yeah.
there.
Okay. So the idea here is that there are different, ways of modifying the program that are kind of floating around, but it doesn't sound like, we can shift gears because I do want to talk a little bit about IT careers and how this affects that, but it doesn't sound like anybody who's hoping for H-1B visa reform should expect any big changes anytime soon.
No.
Okay, sadly. Joe and I were talking earlier, one of the things that is sort of becoming clear, and this is in terms of IT jobs in general, it's not just the H-1B visa, but that IT jobs, and I know you've written a lot about IT careers, seem to be becoming more almost like the factory workers of the old days in terms of, how easily people can be replaced and moved around. And are you seeing any of that out there, or any thoughts on whether that's, something that could be coming in the next 5 to 10 years maybe for IT workers? Either one of you.
I certainly see that going on out there. I mean, I think that, you go back 20 years and it was almost a priesthood with IT people.
With the skills and
with
the
skills and
certifications
the certification. And yes, there were some people who were, a little bit obnoxious about all that. And,
Yeah.
and now the
IT work.
people, right. now-
IT techies,
exactly.
being obnoxious, yeah.
It's like retail workers used to hide in the stock room and IT workers used to hide in the data center,
Yep,
right?
yep.
So, but now, of course, there's a lot more power in the hands of the people. But the interesting phenomenon is that the more things are distributed,
Yeah.
the more you need IT people to keep it all in control in terms of having everything
Because you get
talk
so many
to
people
each
going
other.
off in different directions with
Exactly.
their own devices and their own,
Right.
okay.
Different cloud systems. And at some point, even regardless of where the system is located, whether it's on premises or it's somewhere in the cloud or somewhere, in the ether, somewhere along the line, somebody's going to want to talk to somebody else or share data among different systems. And that's where you need an IT person who knows what the heck they're doing. Because these interfaces and these middleware systems are very complicated. I mean, and it's not for the faint of heart. And just because you may know a little bit of, programming on your Apple, which is great, doesn't mean you can program for this environment and really connect an ERP system to somebody's telephone kind of thing. So this is, and of course security is
I was just
a
going to say, you've
huge
got
thing.
everybody now,
Right.
throwing files up into the cloud, on Dropbox,
Right.
or whatever, who knows where corporate data is winding up.
Exactly.
And people who think they know what they're doing on the front lines because they've got an iPhone or an iPad and they can turn it on,
Right.
don't realize the back end stuff that's necessary to keep everything safe and secure.
Exactly. So, and then it's just, and then all the access that you want to all these different corporate programs, some of which are decades old,
Right.
that are running, on a mini computer or the old saying, or mainframe somewhere in the back room. The data in those systems is still very much needed. So that's where you need to get IT involved. But unfortunately, I think what's happening now with the H-1B program, to bring it back to where we
Right.
were, and also just, in terms of how the industry as a whole is evolving, is that these opportunities are becoming fewer and farther between. And I think it's a harder sell to convince someone to go into IT as a career these days, because they look at these globalization issues and they look at the fact that there's really no path upwards anymore. I mean,
Right.
you used to be able to go to the IT service desk and have a 20 or 30-year career. I don't see that happening anymore. I mean, if you know security or you know programming or you know something that's really in demand, yes, perhaps.
And you'll always be able to theoretically move to another company, but to be able to stay in one place and grow your career in one place is harder and harder than it used to be. And apparently it doesn't look like that's coming back.
I don't think so. How
Yeah.
about you, Pat? Do you see that?
No, it's a head toss about whether technology or IT careers as we know them today will exist in 20 years. It really is.
Is that because everything's being pushed out to the front lines with everybody doing their own thing, or just everything's moving to the cloud, or we're all being replaced by foreign workers, or some combination?
It's a combination. I mean, this profession is only started really in the 1960s when we get
Yeah,
right down to it.
Right.
And so there's zero guarantee that it's going to survive another 60 years.
Right.
There really is. And for all the reasons that Joe mentioned, it may just disappear as a career that we recognize today.
Wow. It's almost like being a journalist. Just kidding.
Well, there's that. It's also it's offshoring. It's H-1B. It's just the way the industry is growing and changing, and of course that's a good thing, I guess. In terms of technology growing and changing and morphing, but it makes it harder to really go into this as a career with a long-term focus. And there's just so many certifications and so many skills, and I mean, one person can only know so much as an expert.
Right.
I mean, you can't know firewalls and intrusion detection systems and be
You got to specialize in something. You can't just be a complete
But companies want more well-roundedness now. They want people who know how to do more things, and they want people with great people skills too. And
Right.
that's a big thing now.
not a traditional IT tech,
Right.
strong suit.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, a lot of those folks are retiring from the workforce, which makes me, wonder what's going to happen to all those COBOL systems that a lot of big companies are still using. People
And that
think
people don't know how to run anymore.
and it's spaghetti. It's just nobody knows how or why, or, the developers made specific decisions that they made. And it's basically being held together by, baling wire and bubble gum and prayer. And, as those folks are exiting the workforce, you've got these gigundo transaction processing systems in airlines and banks.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder what really happened with the
With
Delta.
yesterday,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Somebody's out sick, somebody retires, and whoever ran the thing is gone, and they don't know what to do when it crashes.
It's gone. Oops. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Good point. I hadn't thought
Yeah.
about that. Okay, good. Well, any last thoughts, Pat? We should wrap it up with that. Anything that the federal government can do along these lines? Not H-1B, but in terms of sort of making sure that the U.S. stays on top of technology and make sure that the people who are here have IT careers that they can succeed in. I mean,
Congress has to invest in science and tech.
Okay.
Most of everything, the tablets, everything, all the technology that we're using, all of this came out of basic science research that was developed by the federal government.
Yep.
We're retreating on that. We're cutting that spending every year.
yeah.
And that is going to hurt the long-term growth of this country. So unless we reinvest in basic science and begin to think about new things that we really need, we're going to hurt ourselves, because what Silicon Valley is producing now is a lot of junk.
Right. Okay, good. It's a downbeat note, but I think it's an important point to make. We'll revisit this maybe after the election and see who wins and where Congress is going. But for now, let's leave it at that. Joe, thanks for stopping by. Pat,
you.
thanks for stopping by. That's a wrap.